Good afternoon everybody, my name is Chris Tuckley, I'm Head of Interpretation and Learning for York Archaeology, and it's my pleasure today to introduce a special event taking place as part of the 2024 York Viking Festival in memory of Richard Hall, Deputy Director of York Archaeological Trust and its Director of Archaeology. This takes the place of the usual Richard Hall Symposium, which will return next year for the 40th anniversary of the York Viking Festival. For 2024, we at York Archaeology are delighted that Fedir Androshchuk, Director General of the National Museum of the History of Ukraine, has graciously taken the time to join us to present on a topic that connects York and Kyiv. This would be exciting for us in any year, but 2024 marks an unusual anniversary for us, providing an opportunity to celebrate the historic links between our two cities. Before I introduce and hand over to our speaker, I wanted to look back not to the Viking period, but to the 1980s and some extraordinary events and feats of technology, which, as Fedir has put it to me, provided the people of York with their first insights into the Ukrainian past. Some of the images that I'm sharing today have become available through York Archaeology's recent slide digitisation scheme, whereby around 60,000 photographic slides produced by York Archaeological Trust over a 30-year period have been catalogued and digitised and are now available to browse online. They record not only the archaeological work of the Trust, but also its public events, community engagement and exhibitions at its attractions, so constitute a valuable resource for research into museum practice in years gone by. Some of the exhibitions staged by YAT are fascinating to revisit, particularly as they illustrate innovative, experimental and influential ventures that are less well known than either the York Viking Centre or its festival. One such is the Treasure Trapped in Light exhibition at St Saviour's Church, now the site of our dig attraction. Staged 35 years ago, between May and October 1989, the exhibition is especially well represented within the slides. Amazingly, it was a collaboration with Soviet-era Ukraine, albeit one over which Moscow exercised a significant degree of interpretive control, showcasing holograms of artefacts from 5 Kyivan museums. The holograms, around 60 in number, replicated artefacts from prehistory to the revolution. They toured the Soviet Union and were made available for exhibitions abroad, being the products of the Kyivan Museum's holographic facilities, engaged in the 1980s equivalent of digitising their collections through the expertise of the Institute of Applied Holography at the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences Physics Department. Fedir recalls that the last set of holograms that were developed for the museums toured Kyiv in a bus, stopping in prominent locations to attract public interest. One of the most spectacular treasures from Kyiv was a gold pectoral from a 4th century BC Scythian royal burial, a detail of which featured on the promotional flyer. Slides show how the exhibition was mounted. The holographic plates were housed in panels that were lit from above by a lighting rig supported on a gantry that was erected in the nave. The Scythian and Sarmatian treasures, represented in hologram form, were supplemented with loaned electrotype copies of contemporary materials from the Victoria and Albert Museum. Their position in relation to the panels and their layout within the display case can be seen in this slide. By combining these images with other sources, we can recover something of the experience of visiting the exhibition. We have close-up shots of the loaned items too. Other slides feature a couple in traditional costume taken for promotional use. A delegation of politicians and academics from Ukraine attended for the exhibition launch, and Treasure Trapped in Light was hailed as a critical success. It was the second of 2 temporary exhibitions held at St Saviour's in the warmer months of 1987, 88 and 89. The lack of heating meant it was unsuitable for visitors in autumn and winter. Funds raised by the exhibitions held there contributed to its full conversion to the Archaeological Resource Centre attraction in 1990, and this was rebranded to become DIG in 2006. So in this way we can see that our Ukrainian friends and their exhibition materials helped to fund the attractions that survive to this day in York. The organisers of the Treasure Trapped in Light exhibition recognised the connections between Viking Coppergate and Viking Ukraine, about which we will shortly hear more from Fedir, and sought to capitalise on them in the exhibition flyer, which advised visitors to Jorvik not to miss the opportunity to glimpse the other end of the Viking world, where for a time the Vikings ruled in Kyiv amongst the exotic treasures of an eastern court. The Coppergate helmet, or the York helmet as it's sometimes known, currently on display at the Yorkshire Museum, also features heavily in the slides, with images of its recovery in 1982, cleaning and conservation by yacht staff, and close-ups to record the condition of its constituent parts prior to its reconstruction by specialists at the British Museum. As in Kyiv, the latest holographic techniques were used to capture three-dimensional images of the helmet. The resulting holograms were held to be the best visual record available of the helmet before its restoration, and the absence of the helmet from the York Viking Centre, which opened 2 years after the helmet's discovery, was compensated for by having its hologram on display there in the York Gallery. This brings us to the principal theme of today's presentation, the Coppergate helmet and a comparable item presented to the National Museum of the History of Ukraine in 2022. The story of the helmet's discovery in York is well known, but I will rehearse it here briefly for those not already familiar with it. For anyone wishing to access the full 1992 fascicule on the helmet by Dominic Tweddle, this, like our slide collection, has been digitised and can be accessed in our online collections. The helmet was uncovered by a mechanical digger during construction work at a site adjoining the main Coppergate dig, and the Coppergate dig had only excavated a fifth of the whole area available for redevelopment. The helmet was severely damaged by the digger's bucket. It was at first thought to be a stone, but fortunately the site foreman examined it more closely and saw the lettering on its crest. Work was halted and the supervising archaeologists were called over to take action. A small excavation was mounted, revealing that the helmet lay face down in the corner of a wood-lined pit. The pit also contained a sword beater, a churn dasher, a crucible fragment, an antler beam, a rubbing stone, and fragments of fuel ash slag and glass. Although subsequent radiocarbon and dendrochronological dating for the pit indicated the Anglian period, the environmental analysis produced insect assemblages and dye plant fragments more characteristic of York's Viking period. The helmet itself apparently saw action during its lifetime, with possible evidence for battle damage and contemporary repairs. It seems to have been deposited deliberately, perhaps with a view to it being recovered later, with its neck guard of mail carefully folded inside, along with one of its cheek pieces. It carries an inscription, a prayer or charm, and the personal name Oz here, and has been dated on stylistic grounds to the 3rd quarter of the 8th century, with decorative motifs that are in keeping with a pre-Viking Anglian context and Northumbria's so-called Golden Age. Today's presentation suggests a perspective on the Coppergate helmet that will be unfamiliar to many here in the UK, but which provides us with a chance to reconnect York and Kyiv through our shared interests in the Viking period via the research and expertise of our speaker. Technical issues have meant that the entirety of today's event has been pre-recorded, so there is no opportunity to put questions to Fedir live. I've already enjoyed hearing his talk, however, and was able to ask him some more about the helmet browband that is its focus. It is a stray find by a metal detectorist on a site with no other clear archaeological significance, and reached the museum shortly before the Russian invasion. It has not yet been put on public display, but Fedir and his colleagues are discussing how it and other recent finds might be presented to audiences in Kyiv, who he tells me have an interest in and appreciation of Viking history not unlike that of UK museum visitors. As you might imagine from the news we have of circumstances in Kyiv and Ukraine more widely, museum work has been incredibly challenging, which makes Fedir's support for the York Viking Festival all the more special. It's a very great pleasure to be able to introduce his talk today. Fedir, who has published extensively on matters as diverse as coinage, weapons and warfare, and cultural connections and exchange across the Viking world, defended his PhD in 1998 at the University of Kyiv. Between 1996 and 2000, he was a lecturer at the Department of Archaeology and Museology of the same university. In 2000, he moved to Sweden and has lived and worked since then in the country as a researcher at Stockholm and Uppsala universities, as well as at the Swedish History Museum. He has been director of the National Museum of the History of Ukraine since 2020 and has recently been chosen to become a member of the International Advisory Board of the newly established Centre of Excellence on the World in the Viking Age at Uppsala University. He is also director of the Sweden and Ukraine in the History of Museum Collections and Exhibition Narratives research project at the Swedish History Museum. In 2023, he was awarded the Individual Archaeological Heritage Prize by the European Association of Archaeologists. In making its award, the association acknowledged Fedir's leadership in protecting Ukrainian archaeological heritage during the war, together with his commitment to raising awareness of the importance of archaeology during such challenging times. The present slide shows Fedir with his award. You can read about the work of the museum and how it has been affected by the war by following the link on screen. It is one of Ukraine's leading cultural institutions, housing around 800,000 exhibits of various kinds. You will also find details on how you can support the museum and its work, which I encourage you to do in light of Fedir's generous support of the Jorvik Viking Festival.
Hello, my name is Fedir Androshchuk. I'm a doctor in archaeology with a particular focus on military aspects of Viking Age societies. I've spent many years studying the weaponry of Eastern Scandinavia, which has resulted in a book titled Viking Age Swords, published in Stockholm in 2014. Currently, I'm the director of the National Museum of History of Ukraine. Ukraine is not just the place where I was born, but an interesting area of research which has been reflected in another book called Viking in the East, Essays on Contacts Along the Road to Byzantium, published in Uppsala in 2013. Throughout my years of research, I have been investigating the various sources that indicate contacts between different regions of Europe during the Viking Age. As you may already know, there is a considerable amount of evidence showing contacts between the British Isles and Scandinavia in Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. However, very few such evidence can be identified for Sweden and Eastern Europe. The traditional explanation for this is the geographical distance between these regions. Nevertheless, it is important to note that such contacts might not only involve personal encounters, but also the transfer of ideas and fashion. These contacts could not have been mass and could not have been explored by selective individuals of high social status who are looking for social ties abroad. Let's take a look at some artifacts that could be relevant to our discussion. This includes some distinctive swords and male penannual brooches used to fasten cloak. A remarkable find is a unique sword with a bronze hilt decorated in so-called ringerike style found in the vicinity of Kyiv city. The shape of the hilt represents a blend of forms characteristic of Anglo-Saxon swords from the late Viking period. Perhaps it was manufactured in the early 11th century in a Scandinavian setting in England and then brought to Rus by some of the Varangian mercenaries serving at the court of Kyiv princes. The large size of the brooches indicate the wealth and status of their owners, which is supported by the Ukrainian context. For example, we have two penannual brooches with decorated ball-shaped terminals found in the cities of Kyiv and Vyshgorod. These objects reflect the adaptation of Anglo-Saxon fashion by the Scandinavians. One such brooch made of silver was found in a rich chamber grave beneath a princely palace in Kyiv. It has been observed that there are very few English coins found in Ukrainian hoards from the early medieval period. However, at least 10 of these hoards contained a moderate number of English pennies, along with Islamic, German and Scandinavian coins that date back to the 11th century. It is worth noting that these hoards have been found in different areas of the country, but some of them are distributed along the old trade road connecting city of Kyiv, Krakow, Prague and Regensburg. Most of the English silver coins were minted for King Ethelred II, while single coins were minted for Knut, Hardeknut and Edward the Confessor. The presence of perforation and loops on these coins indicate that they were meant to be displayed, revealing this social status, the social status and social network of the owners. All these artifacts provide evidence of contacts between England, Scandinavia and Ukraine in the late Viking Age. However, to find the earliest evidence of such contacts, we need to consult the museum collection of the National Museum of the History of Ukraine. And the object under consideration represent the cutouts for the eyes of the helmet decorated with the tightly placed traverse grooves. It is a slightly concave, half-circulated hatched brass eyebrows connected in the middle part of a half-round and a semicircular in cross-section and flattened base for the nozzle. Judging from a hole situated near the edge, the later one was joined to the base with a small rivet. 4 other similar holes have been preserved in the middle of the eyebrows. The total width of the eyebrows is 162 mm, the height 70 mm. The measurements of the eyebrows are very similar to those recorded in the Coppergate helmet discovered in the 1982 in the centre of York. The helm consists of a cape made of iron bands, 2 hinge-ship pieces, and a cotton of mail and brass fittings. The helmet is dated to the 8th century. The terminals of the eyebrows are shaped in the form of animal-fanged head portrayed in a profile. The details of the animal's eyes and ears on the Ukrainian piece are not distinctive. The comparison with the Coppergate helm show the lack of some features, fangs, eyes and prominent head of the animal, as well as a slightly gaped mouth on the Ukrainian terminals. All this indicate the secondary character of the Ukrainian piece, which we should date a little bit later than its Anglo-Saxon prototype. The finds of helmets from this period are scarce. We do know about 15 of such helms in Swedish Uppland. They have been associated by scholars with the graves of local landowners. How can the appearance of this high-status Anglo-Saxon object in Ukraine be explained? It seems most plausible that it has to be interpreted in the context of dissemination of other artifacts of North European origin discovered in Ukraine. The reassessment of both finds obtained by metal detecting and from the archaeological surveys allow us to single out artifacts dated to the so-called Vendel and early Viking periods. The earliest one is an S-shaped bronze brooch discovered in the Ternopil Oblast or region, dated to the last part of the 6th, beginning of the 7th century. Also, a metal-detected find of an equal-armed brooch from the Vendel period from the outer Subcarpathia in the area of modern city of Lviv should be mentioned among these early artifacts. A female brooch of copper alloy in the form of a bird of prey discovered in the vicinity of the village Garokhiv, Lutsky district in Volhynia, in the western part of Ukraine, is a unique find of the Vendel period. It is slightly bent, the back side of the brooch is flat, and the fastening construction is broken. The beak of the bird is curled, the head with the eyes is divided from the neck by a crest. The character of a motif covering the surface of the neck is unclear. The back part is tripled by representation of long narrow feather wing, a double-parted tail visualized by 2 different ribbon vivens. A large hooked claw is depicted between the beak and the tail. The high relief of the decoration of the surface of the brooch showed the high artistic quality of this particular piece of Scandinavian jewelry. Stylistic parallels of the artifacts are the shield mounts from the Sutton Hoo ship burial in England, some mounts from Norway, Gotland, as well as several similar brooches recorded in Denmark, Norway and Sweden, and dated between 550 and 650. It has been observed that some Anglo-Saxon zoomorphic shield ornaments were elaborated into brooches on or pendants and have been considered symbols of power and status. The next group of objects consists of items of Carolingian and Scandinavian origin brought to Ukraine during the 9th century. Among these, a winged spearhead has been detected in the area of Chernihiv city. Recently, a new sword of so-called Peterson type B, which is LA type, has been published. It came to light in the footplain of the Kyivan river in the area of city of Gluchiv in the northeastern part of Ukraine. The find of an oval brooch of early type acquired by a detectorist in the area of Poltava city in eastern Ukraine. And this find is exceptional because we do know similar objects from normally from sites of urban character like Kyiv or Shestavica. In the area of Zhokva, in the Lviv region in the western part of Ukraine, the only Ukrainian find of a Hedeby coin corresponding to a type dated around 825 current era has been found. A remarkable phenomenon, a group of Wendel period objects discovered in late chronological contexts. Among them is a big-shaped brooch from the 7th century found in a cultural layer of Shestavica settlement dated to the 10th century and interpreted as a kind of biographical object of a resident of southern Scandinavian origin. One more object of similar biographical nature is a sword that has been discovered by a metal detectorist in the area of Chernihiv. It is represented by an iron hilt with a lower guard, characteristic for the sword of 10th century, and a decorated pommel of copper alloy, typical for the swords from the 7th-8th century. From the same area derives a damaged box brooch of Gotland origin, decorated in the late Wendel period style, dated from the end of the 8th to mid of 9th century. It is remarkable that all biographical objects have been found in the same Chernihiv area, which is characteristic of a particularly large number of artifacts of Scandinavian origin. Perhaps the appearance of objects from the Wendel and Viking periods in the same areas indicate some sort of continuity in contacts between different generations of visitors of these areas of Ukraine. All these finds indicate that the helmet detail from the Ternopil region is not a unique find in terms of the appearance of other North European objects in the country. Its link with Anglo-Saxon England should be discussed with the silver vessels of Byzantine origin found in the Sutton Hoo ship burial dated to the 7th century. It includes a vast dish made during the Emperor Anastasius' reign, the fluted bowl with the classical female profile head, and a set of 10 silver bowls and a pair of spoons with Greek inscription with names Saul and Paul. Two finds and at Krimani and Varnia in eastern Estonia mark the dissemination of Byzantine silver bowls via the Baltic. One of these bowls bears 4 control stamps of Emperor Anastasius, and both vessels are dated to the 5th century. In many cases, such Byzantine silver bowls were deposed in a later context, indicating that they might represent heirlooms. Remarkably, some hoards of the 7th century, like Pereshchepina and Martinivka, in Ukraine, like the Sutton Hoo burial, contain bowls from the 6th century, meaning that they have been used for a long period of time. Moreover, the Byzantine spoons from Sutton Hoo and Martinivka represent the same type and most probably are products of the same workshop. Scholars highlight finds of Byzantine golden coins dated to the 5th and 6th century discovered on Bornholm, Öland, Gotland and Saaremaa. This findings might be explained as evidence of the involvement of the local population in the transregional fur trade or military service in Byzantium. The Byzantine silver vessels of Satan Hurul grave and numerous hoards in Ukraine, Romania and Albania have been treated as a common phenomenon representing diplomatic gifts. Bearing all this in mind, the most possible explanation for the Vandal and early Viking Age objects is that they might have been brought to Ukraine during the early stage of the exploration of the territory, or rather they were lost on the way to Byzantium by their owners. In the 6th and 7th century, Byzantium faced threats from the Avars, Slavs, Bulgars and Persians, as well as Arabs, which created a good opportunity for mercenaries from the north. However, if these were warriors, the presence of Scandinavian female brooches needs to be explained. The role and participation of women in military and trade expeditions are still far from the understanding. Whether they were members of these enterprises, or we are dealing here with the traveling families. What is remarkable that from the second half of the 6th and beginning of the 7th century, a range of imported objects from Byzantium, such as amethyst and shell beads, Cypriot shells, silk and cameos, became to be popular among the local North European aristocracy. However, it would be not an exaggeration to argue that these contexts were still sporadic and short-term. The isolated finds of jewelry and weapons of North European origin have been recorded on Ukrainian lands on both sides of the Dnieper River and might be associated with both men and women. The oldest of them go back to the second half of the 7th century and are the earliest material evidence of contacts with Scandinavia. The lack of concentrations of these antiquities around certain settlements shows the lack of interest in a permanent residence and or episodic character of encounters with the local population. The possible reason for such visits might be the search for local resources, like fur, honey, slaves, and transit diplomatic missions. The places and areas of the finds indicate that they were brought by owners who could use both large rivers and land routes. The appearance of early North European objects in Ukraine must be connected with the beginning of the Viking Age in the Baltic, which can be referred to as the 7th and 8th century. The social phenomenon of this period is documented by a group burial in 2 boats found in Salme on the island of Saaremaa in Estonia. In one of them, the remains of 7 men, aged 845, accompanied with the weaponry, were discovered. In the second boat, the skeletons of 44 men lying in 4 layers were recorded. The bones of 9 of men had revealed traces of slash wounds. Also, weapons including swords, shield bosses and arrowheads have been mentioned. Bones of domestic animals, birds and fish were recorded in both boats. The elements of weapons have parallels in the burial sites of the local nobility in Vendel and Valsgärde in Sweden. The mid-Swedish origin of the buried people was confirmed by the result of the analysis of ancient DNA. This group tried to establish control over the hubs of trade along the eastern route, such as the famous site Grobina in Latvia. From the Baltic via the Neman River and other rivers was possible to reach Pripyat River as well as the western and central part of the territory of Ukraine. However, what is most important for our discussion is that similar types of artifacts to those found in Ukraine from the Vendel and the early Viking Age period have been discovered on the south coast of the Baltic Sea in the area of Elblag in Poland. Here in Janov Pomorsky, the port of Trosa, and other sites numerous finds of female jewelry and weapons of Scandinavian, as well as coins of Anglo-Saxon origin, 2 Northumbrian sticas of Eanred and Ethelred were discovered. Among Islamic coins revealed in Yana Pomorsky, the Abbasid imitation of Khazar origin dated to the late 830s should be mentioned. These finds show the importance of the Vistula River in the dissemination of both Scandinavian and Oriental objects, as well as contacts between Ukraine with the Baltic coast and Scandinavia. Those finds that were made to the east of Dnieper River might be considered evidence for the exploration of the road along the Desna, Seym and Siversky Donets rivers by the Scandinavians, which led to the lands of the Khazars. The sword from the vicinity of Gluchiv mentioned above, which belonged to this earlier period, has a pattern-welded blade and has generally been considered an expensive high-status weapon. The same applies to the helmet, a detail of which was found in the Ternopil region. These 2 exceptional finds indicate that rich chieftains were involved in these expeditions. The sources of the decoration of Ukrainian helmet are undoubtedly of Anglo-Saxon origin and are currently the only evidence of contacts with the British Isles in this early time. The main significance of the discussed selection of artifacts is that they represent material evidence for the presence of people of North Europe on the territory of Ukraine in the 7th–9th centuries, that is, long before the arrival of princes who associated themselves with the Rurik dynasty, whose representatives ruled over the vast territory of Eastern Europe during the 9th–15th centuries. However, no doubt that before this, the relations between North Europe and Ukraine had been already established and were not connected with the history of this particular dynasty. Thank you very much for your attention.